The story of the Smothers Brothers is one of deep family loss, hard work, rebellion, and a major turning point in American entertainment. It all began long before they became famous comedians. Their father, Major Thomas B. Smothers, Jr., was an Army officer during World War II, in 1941 when Japan invaded the Philippines. He was captured while his wife Ruth and their two young sons, Tom and Dick, were sent away to safety. Major Smothers survived the brutal Bataan Death March and was later sent to a prison camp in Japan called Fukuoka No. 22. The conditions were horrible, and when he became too sick to work, he was moved again in April 1945, just months before the war ended. Sadly, he never made it to his destination. Some reports say he was buried at sea, others that he was cremated in Korea. Out of the 110 men who were transported with him, only 36 survived, and Major Smothers was the last to die. Ruth Smothers was left to raise her two sons, Tom, born in 1937, and Dick, born in 1938, on her own. Life was hard, and she worked long hours to keep the family going in California. That struggle shaped the brothers' personalities and humor. They learned to face pain with laughter and to see the funny side of life's challenges. Their career began almost by accident. Tom had started a small musical group called the Casual Quintet while in college, and Dick joined in by learning to play the bass. When the other members left, the two brothers kept performing together. During shows, they would talk and joke between songs just to fill time, and soon realized that audiences loved their playful teasing. That was the real start of their comedy style. Tom played the innocent, silly brother, and Dick played the serious, responsible one. Their back-and-forth arguments felt natural because that was how they really interacted. Their most famous line became "Mom always liked you best," which fans instantly loved in 1959. They got a chance to perform at a small San Francisco club called the Purple Onion. They were booked for just 2 weeks but were such a hit that they stayed for 36 weeks. They mixed folk music with witty humor, and audiences couldn't get enough. At first, they were making only $2 a night. But by the end of their run, they were earning $2,000 a week. Their first record, The Smothers Brothers at the Purple Onion, came out in 1961 and launched their professional career by the mid-1960s. They were ready for something bigger. CBS, one of the biggest television networks in America, was struggling to compete with NBC's hit show Bonanza, which dominated Sunday nights. CBS needed a bold new idea to attract younger viewers, so they took a risk on Tom and Dick Smothers. The brothers were funny, smart, and a little rebellious, exactly what CBS needed to seem fresh again. The Smothers Brothers Comedy, K6, 1967, at first. It looked like a regular variety show with comedy sketches, musical acts, and celebrity guests. Ed Sullivan introduced them as typical all-American boys, but viewers soon realized they were anything but typical. Within a few weeks, the show started tackling real political and social issues. The brothers joked about the Vietnam War, criticized politicians, and questioned authority, all things that television usually avoided at the time. Their comedy was daring, and audiences loved it. Within just 2 weeks, they beat Bonanza in the ratings, something nobody thought was possible before the show began. Tom Smothers had insisted on having complete creative control, and CBS, desperate for a hit, agreed. That decision gave the brothers rare freedom to say and do what they wanted on national television. They used that freedom to invite guests who spoke about the issues of the day. Folk singers like Pete Seeger performed anti-war songs. They poked fun at President Lyndon B. Johnson and other leaders, which was unheard of in 1960s network television. Every week felt like a surprise, and every episode pushed the limits of what was acceptable. Of course, CBS censors constantly fought them. Every word, every second of the show was reviewed before airing. The network often tried to cut parts they thought were too political or too controversial, but the brothers fought back. Sometimes they even turned the censorship itself into a joke, making fun of how restricted television had become. Their young team of writers shared that rebellious spirit. Some of them would later become legends, including Steve Martin, Rob Reiner, Lorne Michaels, and David Steinberg. They helped create a new kind of comedy, clever, socially aware, and unafraid to take risks. That creative energy helped shape later classics like Saturday Night Live, All in the Family, and The Mary Tyler Moore Show. One of the show's most famous moments came on October 6, 1968, when the Smothers Brothers aired the Beatles' promotional film for Hey Jude. It was the first time American audiences saw anything like it. Today, we'd call it a music video, but back then it was something completely new. The Beatles had filmed it just a month earlier in London. It featured a massive orchestra and hundreds of people singing along. The following week, the show aired another Beatles film, Revolution. Showing two Beatles songs back-to-back on television was a huge deal. It gave fans in the U.S. a new way to experience their favorite band and showed how television could connect to the cultural changes happening around the world. The Smothers Brothers also helped bring back voices that had been silenced. Pete Seeger, a famous folk singer, had been blacklisted from television for nearly 17 years because of his political beliefs. In 1967, Tom invited him to perform on the show. Seeger sang Waist Deep in the Big Muddy, a song criticizing President Johnson's handling of the Vietnam War. CBS cut the performance before it aired, afraid of backlash. Tom refused to stay quiet and went to the press. The public reaction was so strong that CBS finally gave in. In February 1968, Seeger returned to sing the song Uncut, and millions of viewers watched. It was a bold and historic moment, one of the first times a blacklisted artist openly criticized the president on national TV. The show also gave a platform to rock bands that other programs wouldn't touch. Between 1967 and 1969, groups like The Who, The Doors, Jefferson Airplane, Buffalo Springfield, and Steppenwolf performed on the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour. These bands were known for being rebellious and loud. Not exactly the kind of entertainment TV networks wanted back then. The Who's performance was one of the most unforgettable. On September 17, 1967, the band performed My Generation, and drummer Keith Moon secretly packed his drum kit with explosives much more than anyone expected. When the song ended, the drums exploded with a thunderous blast, sending smoke and shrapnel across the stage. The explosion was so powerful that guitarist Pete Townshend's hair was blown back, and he suffered serious hearing damage that lasted for the rest of his life. The blast knocked Moon backward, and the chaos left everyone stunned. Amid the smoke, Townshend grabbed Tom Smothers' acoustic guitar and smashed it on stage. Tom stood frozen, shocked but also realizing that this was rock and roll at its wildest. The moment became legendary. Some people were horrified, but many young viewers saw it as pure freedom, a symbol of rebellion and change. Parents thought it was destructive, but teenagers thought it was art. It captured the generational divide of the late 1960s perfectly. The Smothers Brothers didn't just bring rebellion through music. They used humor to challenge the times as well. One recurring skit featured a character named Goldie O'Keefe, played by Lee French. Goldie was a spaced-out hippie who talked about sharing tea, which everyone knew was a playful reference to marijuana. Though the network forced the writers to change some of the wording, the jokes were full of clever double meanings. Younger viewers loved it because it felt like the show understood them in a way adults deemed single quotes. As their popularity grew, the brothers also made powerful friends in the music world. On April 26, 1969, at the Los Angeles Forum, rock legend Jimi Hendrix dedicated his concert to the Smothers Brothers. He called them heroes for giving artists a voice on television and for standing up for freedom of expression. By then, CBS had canceled their show, claiming it was too controversial. But Hendrix's words showed how much impact they had. Their show had changed television forever. Before them, comedy was safe and predictable. After them, it became bold, political, and relevant. They opened the door for others to talk about serious issues through humor. They helped shape a new generation of entertainers who used laughter to question authority and inspire change. The Smothers Brothers story was always about courage. Courage to speak up, to take risks, and to trust that people could handle the truth if it was told with heart and humor. From their childhood struggles after losing their father to the intense battles with CBS over censorship, they proved that comedy could be more than entertainment. It could be a form of resistance. Their impact reached far beyond the 72 episodes they made. They became symbols of honesty and creativity in an age of conflict and change. Even after their show ended, their influence lived on through the comedians and artists they inspired. What began as two brothers making music and joking around turned into one of the most important stories in American pop culture. Their laughter carried the pain of loss, the joy of rebellion, and the hope of a generation that wanted to be heard. And even though their show was cut short, their message never was. They taught America that humor could tell the truth, then that sometimes a joke could be more powerful than a speech. When Joan Baez appeared on the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour, she wanted to dedicate a song to her husband, David Harris, who was going to prison for 3 years because he refused to be drafted and spoke out against the Vietnam War. She was proud of him and said so on the show. But CBS cut most of her words, leaving only a short and vague message before she sang. That act of censorship was just one of many signs that CBS was under intense political and corporate pressure. The network was afraid of upsetting government officials and losing sponsors. Even President Lyndon B. Johnson personally complained about the show. One night, Johnson stayed up until 3 a.m. to call CBS and demand that they rein in the Smothers Brothers. Later, President Richard Nixon pushed even harder to silence them. In 1968, the show had invited Harry Belafonte to perform. He sang "Lord, Don't Stop the Carnival," while footage of police beating anti-war protesters at the Democratic National Convention in Chicago played behind him. The performance was powerful and emotional, but CBS refused to air it. Instead, they sold the 5 minutes of cut airtime to the Republican Party for campaign ads. What had been meant as a protest against political violence was turned into advertising for the very politicians being criticized. It was now obvious where CBS stood. By late 1968, the Smothers Brothers were under constant scrutiny. CBS demanded that every script, joke, song lyric, and even videotape be submitted for approval long before broadcast. It wasn't a simple review. Teams of censors examined every word, looking for anything that might be seen as political or controversial. References to the Vietnam War, religion, or even harmless jokes were often flagged. Guest stars known for edgy humor were heavily edited or completely removed. CBS imposed a strict deadline. All material had to be submitted 10 days before each episode aired. This made it nearly impossible for the writers to keep the show timely or spontaneous. They found themselves trapped in an endless cycle of rewriting, resubmitting, and waiting for approval. CBS often sent back new demands for changes at the last minute, even hours before broadcast. The writers joked that working under CBS censorship felt like death by 1,000 cuts. Tom and Dick Smothers eventually decided to fight back with humor. They wrote a sketch in which Tom played a censor, cutting scripts with giant scissors and interrupting actors mid-sentence. The scene ended with total silence on screen, a direct joke about the censorship they faced. CBS didn't find it funny. Executives refused to air it, calling it harmful to the network's image. Another similar sketch featuring Elaine May was also cut. Her last line summed up their frustration. "If we're not allowed to say anything important, we're just fooling you with empty jokes." Cut deep. Tom Smothers was furious. The censorship had gone so far that even mocking censorship itself was now forbidden. Frustrated, the brothers began to push back in subtler ways. They started submitting tapes later and later, sometimes sending CBS an approved version and then slipping in last-minute edits before the show aired. This infuriated the network. In April 1969, CBS claimed the Smothers Brothers had failed to deliver an episode on time, although there was clear evidence that CBS's own delays were partly responsible. The network used it as an excuse to cancel the show. Their excuse was flimsy. The program was still one of the top 10 most watched in the United States. The real issue wasn't deadlines. It was control. Tom Smothers later said CBS had planned to silence them all along. The dispute became public, and the New York Times published an editorial accusing CBS of turning the brothers into hostages of their own creativity. Public support grew quickly. Fans, artists, and even politicians sent letters and organized protests. What began as a fight over one television show turned into a national conversation about free speech on TV. CBS's executives panicked as the backlash grew. The brothers refused to back down. Tom summed it up simply: "They're not just shutting down our show. They're trying to shut down the truth." Their courage became a defining moment in the history of American television. Meanwhile, CBS had another problem: money. Major sponsors like Ford and Procter & Gamble began pulling their advertisements. These companies feared that the show's political jokes and anti-war stance might offend consumers. Within months, CBS lost millions of dollars. Internal memos later revealed that sponsor pressure was one of the main reasons behind the show's cancellation. It became clear that even a top-rated show could be sacrificed if advertisers were unhappy. Tom Smothers reflected bitterly years later: "We won the lawsuit, but we lost the culture war." The message from advertisers was unmistakable: if you speak too freely, you'll pay the price. The final straw came in March 1969, when Dick Smothers did an impression of President Nixon and joked, "I'll end the Vietnam War as soon as I can find where the off button is." The joke was short but sharp, and it made CBS executives panic. The Vietnam War and the presidency were sensitive topics, and the network didn't want to risk more controversy. On April 4, 1969, CBS abruptly canceled the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour. The official reason was failure to submit tapes on time. But everyone knew it was political. The brothers had just been renewed for another season, and an entire episode featuring comedian David Steinberg's anti-war routine was ready to air. CBS never showed it in the U.S., only in Canada. The cancellation sent a chilling message to performers everywhere: step out of line, and you'll be silenced. The Smothers Brothers sued CBS for breach of contract, beginning a 4-year legal battle. In 1973, they won. The court awarded them $776,300, worth more than $5.5 million today. The ruling was historically established that networks couldn't use censorship as a hidden excuse for canceling shows. But the victory was bittersweet. Their platform was gone, and their creative momentum was lost. CBS wasted no time replacing them. On June 15, 1969, the network launched Hee Haw, cheerful rural comedy filled with country songs and harmless jokes. It avoided controversy entirely and became a long-running hit, lasting 23 seasons. The contrast was stark. CBS replaced bold satire with safe entertainment. It proved that, for the networks, safety and profit mattered more than artistic freedom. Losing the show deeply affected Tom and Dick. Tom took it the hardest, admitting that it left him feeling empty and broke his confidence for years. Dick tried to move on through hobbies like car racing and winemaking. The scars of that experience never fully faded. In 1970, they tried again with a new version of their show on ABC, but the climate had changed. The network was cautious and warned them not to repeat the same controversies. Audiences, too, had moved on. The Vietnam War was winding down, and people were tired of political comedy. Ratings fell, and the show was canceled after the summer season. The Smothers Brothers quickly went from being cultural rebels to symbols of a fading era. In 1975, they made another attempt on NBC. The first episode was a massive success, ranking 5th among all shows nationwide. But behind the scenes, there were tensions with producer Joe Hamilton. Tom wasn't allowed to redo scenes without losing pay, and the brothers couldn't meet freely with writers or speak to the press. Creative restrictions stifled their work, ratings dropped, and Hamilton eventually quit. NBC gave Tom more control for the last 4 episodes, and the brothers used that chance to push boundaries again, joking about taboo subjects like cocaine and featuring major guests like Ringo Starr and George Carlin. Still, NBC canceled the show halfway through the season. It was another reminder that television networks could easily shut down even the most creative voices. Nearly 20 years later, in 1988, CBS surprised everyone by inviting the Smothers Brothers back for a 1-hour reunion special called the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour, the 20th reunion. It was nostalgic and lighthearted, featuring writers like Steve Martin and Bob Einstein. The special earned 3 Emmy nominations and did well in the ratings, but it lacked the political edge of the original. That same year, CBS brought them back for a full revival series, though it launched during a writer's strike. Without new scripts, the brothers had to rely on old material and guest performances. When the strike ended, new writing briefly boosted ratings, but times had changed. The revival lasted just 2 seasons before ending in 1989. Decades later, their influence continued to be recognized. In 2022, the University of California, Santa Barbara accepted the Smothers Brothers' complete archive into its performing arts collection. It included contracts, photos, letters, scripts, and legal documents from their long fight for free speech. Curator David Subert said their work deserved a place alongside the nation's most important cultural collections. Their story remains a vital lesson about how comedy can confront power and inspire change. Before Saturday Night Live ever existed, the Smothers Brothers had already proven that comedy could be political, daring, and meaningful. Their show ran from 1967 to 1969 and made jokes about war, censorship, and politicians. Future icons like Lorne Michaels, who created SNL, learned from their work. Comedians such as Jon Stewart, Stephen Colbert, John Oliver, and Samantha Bee followed in their footsteps. The Smothers Brothers showed that comedy could do more than entertain. It could make people think and question authority. Their show also launched the careers of many famous comedians. Steve Martin got his start writing for them, and performers like Rob Reiner and George Carlin were regulars. Many later said they owed their early success to the creative freedom the Smothers Brothers offered. The brothers created a space where humor could be bold and intelligent, giving American comedy a sharper and more socially aware voice for generations to come. When CBS canceled the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour in 1969, they silenced more than just a television show. They silenced a movement. The brothers' court victory proved that artists could stand up to censorship, but it also revealed how fragile creative freedom could be when challenged by politics and corporate interests. Their courage paved the way for future comedians to speak truth to power. The Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour was more than entertainment. It was a bridge between mainstream America and the counterculture of the 1960s. They welcomed guests like The Who, Jefferson Airplane, Simon and Garfunkel, and Pete Seeger, who had once been banned from television for his anti-war songs. They even introduced music videos like the Beatles' Hey Jude to American audiences. For many viewers, it was their first glimpse of the cultural revolution happening outside their living rooms. Comedian Bill Maher later summed up their legacy perfectly. The Smothers Brothers weren't afraid to upset people who disagreed with them. They weren't trying to please everyone. They showed that comedy could take a stand and that it could matter. Even decades after their show ended, that message still rings true.